Rabbi Dorff, you've attracted a community.
Well, hello there. Glad to meet, glad to meet you.
All right, I guess let's kick it off. Here we go. This is Rabbi Elliot Dorff. The reason I contacted him is because he's a rabbi's rabbi and really a rabbi to the globe in many ways. And so thank God he said yes. I'm really looking forward to his presentation, as I'm sure you are. Rabbi Dorff's suggestion is that he's going to present for about 25 minutes and then take questions. So I think the way we'll do it is if you could chat with me directly. So find me on the list of participants and chat me directly. I'll take some notes and then moderate. If there's many questions on the same topic, I'll group them all together. So that's your role. So listen carefully, and if you have questions, send them directly to me. This is Rabbi Dorff. He is the rector and distinguished professor of philosophy at the American Jewish University. He's written 14 books and sat on commissions for the federal government and beyond. So Rabbi Dorff, how about it?
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I was asked by the Jewish Federation. Oh, I moved, so therefore my camera. Hold on. Yeah, this will. There we go.
Oh, there you go. Focus.
All right. The Jewish Federation here asked me to write like a 2 or 3 paragraph thing on the demise of Roe v. Wade, and so I'm going to read the 2 paragraphs to you, so you'll get a sense of both the Jewish piece of this and the American piece of this, as I understand it. And then I'm going to go back and develop. I mean, the American piece, I think you know as well as I do, but the Jewish piece of it, I'm going to talk a little bit more about, and then stop and take whatever questions you have. Jewish law is much more nuanced on abortion than either the Catholic position or Roe v. Wade. The Catholic view classifies a fertilized embryo as a full human being, but that mistakes the potential for the actual. For we have ample evidence that somewhere between 75 to 80% of fertilized egg cells in women's bodies miscarry, most in the first month of pregnancy, often before the woman knows that she is pregnant. That the Talmud, based on Exodus 21, verses 21 to 25, and undoubtedly on the miscarriages that the rabbis witnessed, classifies the developing embryo as simply liquid during the first 40 days of pregnancy, and like the thigh of its mother from then until birth. It is only when the head, or in a breech birth, the major part of the fetus's body emerges, that it becomes a full human being. Consequently, feticide is not the same as homicide in Jewish law. At the same time, the embryo and later the fetus is a developing human being, and we do have a duty to procreate, an obligation that is especially important to remember in this era when Jews are facing a major demographic crisis. So abortion is required when the life or physical or mental health of the woman is at stake. It is permitted, according to many but not all rabbis, when there is an elevated risk to the woman over that of normal pregnancy, or when the fetus will suffer from a lethal or devastating disease. But by and large, Jewish law would prohibit abortion when done for other reasons. In that way, Jewish law is less permissive than Roe v. Wade. Jewish law, though, however interpreted, should not be the basis of American law, and neither should the stance of any other religion. This goes back to Thomas Jefferson, who asserted that when Americans overwhelmingly agree on a moral issue, for example, prohibitions against murder, theft, and rape, and positive duties to pay taxes and educate your children, then the state may enforce the moral stance as law. But when Americans disagree about a moral issue, the government should leave it to each citizen to determine what is proper. Abortion clearly fits into the latter category. So the new Supreme Court decision that enables states to prohibit abortion altogether or substantially restricts it violates Jefferson's wise balance of how people of multiple faiths and none can live together amicably and productively. As such, it is bad for mutual respect among Americans and American unity. It is also a major blow to the individual liberty that is one important source of American identity and pride. It additionally violates freedom of religion, for in many states, abortion will be prohibited in cases in which Jewish law and the stances of many other religious and secular groups would require it or permit it. It effectively establishes the Catholic and evangelical view of the fetus in violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. For all these reasons, it is a very bad decision. So let me go back now to the Jewish pieces of this, because I would imagine that the American pieces that I mentioned in the second paragraph are pretty clear to you, although I'm happy to talk about those as well. For 40 some years, I've been teaching a course on Jewish law at the law school at UCLA. So I know something about how American law works and how Jewish law works and the differences between them and all of that. So, I mean, if you'd like to talk about the American side of that, I'm happy to do that. But let me talk about the Jewish side. The piece of the Jewish side, I think that is definitely missing in the American side, is the very first commandment in the Bible: be fruitful and multiply. And that piece of it is, if anything, more problematic in our time than in times past, because of the fact that, well, frankly, because of the fact that we Jews go to college and graduate school in far higher percentages than most Americans. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but something like about 70% of Americans 18 years of age finish high school. What percentage of Americans that are Jewish do you think finish high school? It's actually 100%, because if they don't, their parents kill them. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's actually about 93%, right? But still 93% versus 70%. And then a very high percentage of Jews then go to finish bachelor's degrees, and often beyond that. Just to give you a sense of that, this is the Pew report, right? What percentage of Americans do you think finish a BA degree? It's roughly, at this moment, about 30%. Whereas among Jews, it's somewhere between 75 and 80%. Now that's, and then a lot of Jews go on to graduate programs of various sorts. Now that's all very good for education, but it's terrible for fertility, because biologically we've been created to procreate primarily in our late teens and 20s. Up to about age 27, it doesn't make any difference, but from 27 to 35, there's already a 30% infertility rate, where infertility is measured by, you're talking about a heterosexual couple that has not been diagnosed with any particular infertility problems, but from ages 27 to 35, they either, presuming they're not using birth control, right? They either try to get pregnant for a year and are not able to, or they do get pregnant, but they have a series of miscarriages. Either one of those counts as infertility in the literature. And from 27 to 35, there's a 30% infertility rate. And from 35 to 40, that escalates a lot. And you also get much higher percentages of birth defects and other kinds of issues. I read one article in the literature that says from 40 to 42, a couple has a 9% chance of taking home a healthy baby, right? Now, and I hasten to add here, this is not only a woman's problem, that fertility in men also diminishes over time. Sperm counts go down. Sperm counts in any case among American men are about at least as far as we can tell, about a third of what their grandfathers had. And that's a function of environmental issues and things like that. But that's not usually the issue, because when a man ejaculates, it's usually millions of sperm. But the real issues are sperm motility, the ability to swim up the vaginal canal to impregnate the man's wife or other sexual partner. And then primarily, sperm gets misshapen as a man gets older. And so even if it reaches the egg, it can't penetrate the egg, let alone issues of erectile dysfunction later on in a man's life, right? And in women, problems with ovulation, problems with the questions of the degree of hormonal coverage within the uterus, such that that if the woman does get pregnant, that the fertilized egg cell is able to implant within the woman's womb, and questions having to do with with also other issues that we now know of in terms of dealing with fertility, questions of the diet that the woman eats, smoking, alcohol abuse, all of those things, drugs. So, I mean, we now know that there are, and by the way, that also, if they're smoking in the house, that the secondhand smoke affects the fetus as well. So this is very much a man's issue as well as a woman's issue. And because Jews go to college and graduate school in very high percentages, and if they get married at all, they very often get married not in their early 20s, but in their late 20s, 30s, or 40s. We Jews simply are not reproducing ourselves. We were about 18 million before the Holocaust, 12 million after, right? And we are now somewhere around 13 million. That's counting everybody who claims to be a Jew. Now we're not talking about halakhic definitions. And so we're certainly not reproducing what we had before. And we're not even, especially if you leave the Orthodox out, we are not even reproducing ourselves. To do that, you have to have a reproductive rate of about 2.1 to 2.2. That is, for every 2 adults, 2.1 to 2.2 children. Statistically, of course, I've yet to meet the 1.1 child, although some teenagers, I think, may qualify. But that's another matter. But the point is, with the reproductive rate, including the Orthodox of American Jews, is about 1.7. And without the Orthodox, about 1.5, which means that we are in a very deep demographic crisis. And that's not taking into account, once a child is born Jewish, you have to do an awful lot of work in order to educate that child to be a knowledgeable and committed Jew as an adult. But you can't educate someone who's not there. So I think this infertility issue is really the major issue confronting the Jewish community in our time. Because what does that mean? That means that, among other things, we have to be much more open to Jews by choice than Jews have been in the past. It means also that the Jewish community has to, those of us who are older and beyond reproductive ages, have to be much more generous, if we can be, in supporting Jewish day schools, Jewish camps, things like that, so that young adults are not impeded in having children by the costs of raising children and of making them Jewish. I mean, we have to be much more forward about that. And I think that that piece of it, that Jewish piece of it, is really important to take into account in regard to this entire abortion conversation. Now, that said, the passage in Exodus that I referred to, Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 to 25, says that if men are fighting and they hit a pregnant woman, then if she miscarries, then money compensation has to be made based upon a reckoning presumably about how far along she was in the pregnancy. So if she was later in the pregnancy, then the amount of money to be paid for the lost fetus would be more, earlier in the pregnancy, less, right? But if there is injury to her, then it's life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so on, right? So that indicates very clearly that for the Torah itself, the status of the fetus is different from and less than the status of the full-fledged human being, who is the woman, right? That said, I mean, even the life for life thing was left alone, but eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, all of that was changed by the rabbis to monetary compensation as well, but not the distinction between the status of the fetus and the status of the woman. So the Mishnah later on, edited around 200 of the Common Era, says that if a woman is having difficulty in childbirth, then this is all before safe C-sections. they're called cesarean sections because presumably Julius Caesar was delivered that way, right? But if you did a C-section until literally the 1950s, if you did a C-section, that almost always meant the death of the woman. And the reason why because she would bleed out or she would be infected. So I was born in 1943. I just turned 79. You don't have to do the math. My mother was pregnant in 1945. The baby died in utero in the 6th month. But in 1945 in Milwaukee, where I grew up, they could not do a safe C-section. So they had her carried to term, and the fetus was stillborn. And in the meantime, it had poisoned her renal system, her kidneys. So she was bedridden for 2 years. And she was told, my parents were told that they dare not get pregnant again because her kidneys could not withstand another pregnancy. That's why my sister was adopted, right? This is 1945 in the United States. It's only in the late 40s, early 50s that doctors figured out how to use antibiotics in order to be able to do safe C-sections, right? At least in large numbers. So the thing is that if what the Mishnah is talking about is the situation in which a C-section is not a safe option for the woman. So the Mishnah says you have to go into the womb and dismember the fetus in order to save the life of the woman. So even to the very end of pregnancy, according to Jewish law, if the woman's life is at stake, you save the woman and not the child. Now, obviously, with safe C-sections, you want to save them both if you can, right? But until very recently in human history, that was not an option. And so consequently, what you get in the tradition is a very clear sense that the fetus is not, that feticide is not the same as homicide. And then why would you abort? In other words, why would you stop the development of a fetus? Well, first of all, the most important reason is to save the life of the mother. And that across the board, Orthodox to Reform, if the mother's life is at stake, everybody would say that you must abort. But then you get a spectrum of positions. By the way, rabbis are Jews, and the usual thing where there are 2 Jews, there are at least 3 opinions, right? Although I said that once at a scholar in residence weekend, and a man came up to me afterward and said, "Do you really need 2 Jews for 3 opinions?" Right? And I have to say, if that's true for Jews, all the more so for rabbis, right? So the thing is that you really get a spectrum of positions among contemporary rabbis. By the way, within the Orthodox world, as well as in the conservative movement and in the Reform movement, as to what are justifiable reasons to abort. Once the life of the mother, clearly everybody says you should abort in order to save the life of the mother. Then the next question is, what about the health of the mother, the physical health of the mother? And there you get really different positions. The vast majority would say that if it's a clear present danger to, let's say, her kidneys, right, or something, to take my mother's example, then you would abort for that reason as well. Because even if it's sipuk pikuach nefesh, if it's a fake pikuach nefesh, a doubtful saving of a life, then you have to save the life, even if you're not completely sure that carrying the child to term would in fact be a threat to the woman's life. So health reasons are usually accepted, physical health reasons, wherever the woman has an elevated risk over that of normal pregnancy, are usually accepted as reasons as well. So for example, if the woman is diabetic, then actually in current situations, given modern medical care, the woman really has a choice. She can say, look, some of you may have seen, oh God, what's the name of that movie where the woman has kidney issues? It's not a Jewish woman. Dolly Parton was in it. Anyway, it'll come back to me. Anyway, where the woman gets pregnant even though she knows she has kidney problems, and she's
I'm
told she
hearing
shouldn't.
steel magnolias.
That's it, steel magnolias. Thank you. Now we'll be able to go to sleep tonight. Right, steel magnolias. You may remember that. So now she's not Jewish in the movie, right? But if she were Jewish and she had that diagnosis and that she had kidney problems and diabetes, then it would depend upon what the doctors say in her particular case. So if it were a major threat to her, then she would be required to get an abortion, right? If it's not, if it's doubtful, then in consultation with her doctor, she may decide to continue on with the pregnancy, but get much more prenatal care than normally happens to make sure that she's able to sustain this pregnancy and come out alive herself, right? Or she may choose to abort in order to avoid the extra risk. Okay, so that's the second category, right? The first category is where it's a clear threat to the woman's life or health, then she must abort. Where it's an elevated risk, but manageable, or at least the doctors think so, then she may choose to abort or she may choose not to, but then get extra prenatal care. But by and large, abortion is not allowed in Jewish law because of the obligation to procreate. Is there an opportunity to use contraceptives in Jewish law? Yes. As a matter of fact, the Mishnah talks about them. I mean, this goes back to the 2nd century, and it's not completely clear that the contraceptives that they were talking about would be effective, but they do talk about a cup of reeds, presumably some kind of oral contraceptive that was available at the time, or at least they thought would be contraceptive. And they also talk about a moch, which was a cloth that would be inserted into the vaginal canal, presumably to try to prevent sperm from reaching the egg. Now, whether those devices worked in the 2nd century or not is anybody's guess, but those were clearly accepted if the woman's life or health were at stake, if she got pregnant. So to this day, in our time, there are many more sophisticated forms of birth control, including things like the morning after pill and RU486 and things on that order, right? And again, if the mother's life or health is at stake, then by all means, she should use them. Mental health issues came into being in Jewish law in the late 18th century, when there was a case before a rabbi of a woman who had been impregnated through incest. And the rabbi determined that if she were required to go to term, she would literally go insane. So the rabbi permitted an abortion. Now, remember, this is the late 1700s, the late 18th century, when abortion was not really safe. They didn't really know how to do that safely. But nevertheless, this particular rabbi said that her mental health justified an abortion. So that, of course, in the contemporary period leads to all kinds of questions. What does mental health mean? And exactly how distressing is it that the woman how distressed does the woman have to be in order to justify an abortion based on mental health reasons? And does it include things like economic reasons? Very distressed because they can't afford to have another child, or very distressed because she had a terrible pregnancy before and now she's having nightmares, right? All kinds of reasons that you can imagine, right? Now, so I mean, I think both given the obligation to procreate and given on the other side the understanding that the fetus is not a full-fledged human being, the Jewish tradition would allow abortions in ways that the Catholic or evangelical traditions would not, and actually require them in certain circumstances, but would not allow them simply because the woman got pregnant and doesn't want and decides afterward that she doesn't really want to have a pregnancy. There's a really interesting article that's been in virtually every anthology of bioethics since it was written, by Judith Jarvis Thompson, about abortion, in which she distinguishes between the Good Samaritan, the minimally decent Samaritan, and the terrible Samaritan, right? And she does that on the basis of what were the conditions under which she got pregnant. So let's say she got she got pregnant through an act of rape. Well, then it would be a superb Samaritan if she carried the pregnancy to term, even though she presumably would not want to keep the child and have it adopted. That would be a superb Samaritan. She would certainly have a right to abort under those circumstances. What if she got pregnant and but they were using birth control and it was by mistake that she got pregnant? Then it would be a good Samaritan to keep the pregnancy despite the fact that they had taken steps not to have a child. What if she did not use birth control? And neither did he. And maybe even at the time that they got pregnant, they had decided that they wanted to have a child and then later changed their mind. Judith Sharford Thompson, not Jewish, a secular ethicist, says it's a minimally decent Samaritan who would maintain the pregnancy under those circumstances. Now, whether the law should require that they do or not is a whole other matter. But if you're looking at this from a secular ethical point of view, that's at least one secular ethicist understanding of when it's appropriate, when it's morally permissible to have an abortion and when not. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And by the way, again, from my point of view, and from Jefferson's point of view, in terms of American law, this should not be in the law at all. This should be left to the individuals to decide what they want to do. But frankly, as a rabbi, talking to Jews, and especially to young Jews, and I do this at camp all the time, at Ramah and all of that, right? First of all, I tell them, don't wait too long to get married. And once you get married, don't wait too long to have children, because frankly, the pressures of graduate school are no less, if anything less, they are less than the pressures of your first job, right? So if you are able to find a mate while you're in college, by all means, first of all, pick a college where there are a lot of other Jews, not only because you're more likely to be able to find, services, holiday celebrations, all of that, at a college with a lot of Jews, and you're more likely to, if you want to take major in physics, whatever, but take a course in Jewish studies, you're more likely to find that, and of course, with in a college with a lot of other Jews. But frankly, also for romantic reasons, you're more likely to find a Jewish mate in a college where there are a lot of other Jews. So I tell these high school students, pick a college with a lot of other Jews, and on your agenda should be, it's not too early to look for a mate, right? And if you find one and you get married at age 22 or 23, whatever, right? It's not too early to start thinking about having children, right? Now, what that may mean is that your parents might have to step up to help you support them while you're in graduate school. And people our age, let me just tell you, the Talmud says that not only do parents have the obligation to educate their children, but grandparents do too. And so if you are financially able, you should be contributing to the Jewish education of your grandchildren. I'm not telling you to do something that I don't do. My wife and I do that. So if you can contribute to the Jewish education of your grandchildren, please do that and tell your children, this is simply my duty. This is not because I don't think you can do it on your own. This is because I, as a grandparent, have that Jewish duty. The Talmud tells me so. Okay, so this is not to undermine your sense of respect or my respect for you, or your sense of being able to support yourself. So I mean, but you really do have to. But that really is an issue that sometimes impedes young couples from having children, and I think people our age have to step up about this. Sometimes grandparents, and I just see them, have no budget for their grandchildren. That's a whole other matter, right? Obviously, it depends upon what kind of monetary situation you're in, what kind of monetary situation they're in, all of those things, obviously. Okay, but if you are able to, then that's something you should at least think about. Okay, I am going to stop here and take whatever questions you have.
Okay, friends, if you want to raise your hands, either electronically or manually, please do. And Melissa, can they unmute themselves or do we unmute them? I see the port noise. I have a question. And the Tobolskis.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, abortion for lack of a better word, convenience is not allowed. So if a young woman gets pregnant and for whatever reason decides she can't keep the baby or doesn't want the baby, she cannot have an abortion. Is that what I'm understanding from you?
Yes, that's a very good reason to use contraceptives.
Right, which don't
Right.
always work.
And maybe even the morning after pill.
Mhm.
Right. But it's not a good reason to abort, especially later on in pregnancy. Because I forgot to mention to you, the rabbis, again, they didn't have sonograms or anything like that, right? So what they saw when women miscarried was that the first 40 days, the fetus is simply liquid, maya da alma, simply water, right? And from the 40th day on, it is like the thigh of its mother, right? Now, what is that? First of all, you have to understand what 40 days means. Gynecologists count from the last period that the woman had. So that's what leads to the 40-week pregnancy. Geneticists, usually people get pregnant in the middle of the menstrual month. So the actual gestational period is 38 weeks of a normal pregnancy, right? The rabbis were counting from the first period that she missed. So their 40 days is really 54 days roughly of gestation. I was on a project for the American Association for Advancement of Science on stem cell research and embryonic stuff and the like. And one of the people who spoke to us was one of the first two doctors to isolate embryonic stem cells. One of them was at the University of Wisconsin, the other was at Hopkins. And the one from Hopkins taught us, this is 2001, I think, when we had that project, taught us about the nature of embryonic development. And then during a coffee break, this man was not Jewish. During a coffee break, I said to him, what would a fetus look like around 54 days of gestation? And he said to me, well, it would look like a thigh. And I almost dropped my coffee, I have to say, right? Because I said to him, that's exactly what the rabbis say in the Talmud, that it's like the thigh of its mother. Why? Why? And I said to him, why did you say that? So he said, because around 54 days of gestation, if a woman miscarries, it would be a bone with flesh and some hair. And since it would come from the groin area of the body, the doctor told me, said it was sort of like the thigh of its mother, which is exactly the image that the rabbis used, right? Now, of course, they didn't know about DNA. They didn't know about, a number of the things that we know about. But the point is that with that kind of distinction means that the justifications for abortion early on in pregnancy don't need to be as strong as they are later on in pregnancy, right? Because you're not dealing with a fetus that is as developed early on in pregnancy as you are later in pregnancy. Moreover, abortion is more life-threatening for the woman later on in pregnancy, right? So another reason why abortion is more prohibited later on in pregnancy and harder to justify is because of the threat to the woman's life. Again, all before contemporary science. Okay? But yes, if you're asking about traditional Jewish law, abortion for convenience, as you put it, would not be allowed.
And what are the implications of the thigh? What are the implications of that the fetus is like a thigh of a woman?
So the implications are that it's like the thigh of the woman, not a whole woman, right? So it's not a full-fledged human being. And therefore, abortion to save the life of the woman, let's take the obvious case, abortion to save the life of the woman is is not only allowed but required. Whether you're a woman or a man, I'm going to take the image absolutely literally. Let's say that you have a thigh that is infected and has turned gangrene. And the only way in order to save your life is to amputate your thigh. Then, according to Jewish law, you would be required to amputate your thigh in order to save your life. Again, whether you're a man or a woman. Okay? So in the same sort of a way, if it's like the thigh of the woman, of the mother, then she would be required to abort if it's going to threaten her life. Okay.
Hi, this is Lisa Estes, and I would like to add a comment at this point. I really appreciate your connection to science, and I think that that's really important for us to be focusing on because it's a very clear cut. It's, you know, we're not talking about whether it's right or wrong. We're talking about life and death. But I would also like to add that we are living in a very difficult time in our world where there's a lot of social issues. And I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to not focus only on the Roe v. Wade, which I am deeply committed to. But there are a lot of other human rights issues that we're dealing with. The Black Lives Matter issue and immigrant issues. And I think that it's really, really important for us right now to be looking at all of these issues and to be verbalizing that these injustices are wrong. Right. As Jewish people and as congregants. And I think we really need to start speaking out. And we should not be afraid to do that.
Amen, amen, amen. Absolutely right. Since I mentioned the Catholics, let me just tell you that I've been on after Vatican II, which completely revolutionized the relationship between Catholics and Jews. One of the things that Nostra Aetate, the Vatican II document on the relationship of Catholics to other religions, section 4 of that document is about Jews. Among the other things it said, again, completely revolutionary, is that not all Jews at the time of Jesus, nor any Jews since, are responsible for the death of Jesus. My father was born in Poland and came here when he was 12, and he remembered being called Christ killer, right? But the Nostra Aetate already says not so anymore, and that God doesn't give up any of God's covenants, so that they gave up, the Catholic Church gave up trying to missionize among Jews. I mean, if a Jew wants to convert to Catholicism, they will process that person, but they don't missionize in the same way that evangelical Christians do. Evangelical Christians actually about 2 years ago took out a full-page ad in the New York Times about, it started out, "We love Jews, therefore we want to make them Christian," right? Whereas the Catholics don't do that anymore, right? And I've been part of the Catholic priest-rabbi dialogue here since 1973, co-chaired it for a number of years, right? The Catholic, the bishop's pastoral statements on the environment and on poverty and on immigration are right on target. Their view of abortion, I think, is completely wrong. Okay. By the way, their view of end-of-life issues is much closer to ours than their view of beginning of life issues. So I should mention, this is not an anti-Catholic stance. I would never be a Catholic. Thank God I was born Jewish. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Because I just don't believe in their theology one bit. And I also don't believe in their understanding of human beings and all kinds of other things, right? I have studied a lot of other religions. I took a course in New Testament in college, a course in Islam, a course on Asian religions, all of that stuff, right? I mean, I really am very much interested, and I'm majored in philosophy. I really do believe that there are moral and intelligent people in the world who are not Jewish, and that we really need to have respectful interfaith understandings with each other and relationships with each other. That said, that doesn't mean that everything that everybody else says is fine. It's not. And you're absolutely right. With this entire conversation happens in an American environment in which we do not have socialized medicine. So what this means is that, you know, if this abortion decision were rendered in, let's say, Canada, right, I would not be happy with it one bit. But at least there, everybody has access to prenatal care and to postnatal care, right? That's not true in these United States, right? Let alone issues of education. And I went to Columbia as an undergraduate, and President Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So on Thursday afternoons, my first 3 years of college, I was in a school in Harlem, a junior high school in Harlem, teaching 7th graders who were reading on a 2nd grade reading level, right? My last year of college, I was at a different junior high school in Harlem, teaching 9th graders who, if anybody was going to go to college, these were the kids, or that's at least what the teachers thought. So I was doing enrichment work for them. And I still remember in the middle of the year, there was one day when the boys had their own program. So I had the girls by themselves. And they said to me, what do we need this all for? We're going to get pregnant in another year or two. You could have wiped this white boy off the floor, right? It took me a little while to sort of understand what they were talking about. And I said to them, you know, it's not inevitable that you're going to get pregnant. I did define that term, right? You should have something to do with this, right? But you're absolutely right. I mean, this entire issue doesn't come in a vacuum. This entire issue is very much a function of how we deal with healthcare in our society, how we deal with education in our society, how we deal with the environment, how we deal with immigration. All of that stuff is very much impacted by what the Supreme Court did. God knows what they're going to do with other kinds of rights, gay and lesbian rights and all of that.
So Rabbi, I completely agree with you. And I'd like to ask you, what should we as a congregation be doing to speak out? And what is the appropriate way for us to speak out for these really, really important issues?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, speak out in any way that you think is going to have an effect. That means through interfaith kinds of dialogues. It means politically. It means in terms of, you know, the people that you elect and the people that you support, if you support people monetarily or in other ways. It means writing op-eds to your local newspaper. It means, well, it means trying to, one of the things that a colleague of mine has suggested is that conservative congregations in red states, you'll pardon the term, or in states in which abortion is now going to become illegal, file lawsuits that forbidding abortion violates our freedom of religion. Having blanket prohibitions against abortion, or even prohibitions beyond whatever is going to be in Texas, 15 weeks, I think, right? That kind of prohibition is a violation of our freedom of religion. And see what happens.
There are models currently for that lawsuit.
There is this rabbi in Florida that's trying to do it. And I'm sure the ACLU will be very happy to help you with these kinds of models. By the way, the National National Conference of Jewish Women is organizing a number of these lawsuits. So you may want to be in partnership with some of these organizations that have more legal expertise than a normal congregation would have, in order to push this forward. And by the way, this in regard to abortion, but in regard to the other issues we were talking about, you know, don't be silent. I mean, you can't do everything. I mean, my favorite statement in all of rabbinic literature, bar none, is Rabbi Tarfon. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor v'lo ata ben chorin libatel mimenu. Yours is not to finish the task, but neither are you free to desist from it. Right? Don't expect it. When I was teaching 7th graders who were reading on a 2nd grade reading level, I will tell you at age 18, I thought I was going to save the world on Thursday afternoons. Um, and then I found out that they forgot a lot of the words I had taught them the week before when I came back, right? This was a lesson in humility, right? But it was also a lesson in that doesn't mean I shouldn't go back and try yet again to try to teach these people in the same sort of a way, right? Pick whatever cause it is that you want. That youth on the and all, the whole list that I just gave you is really important. Pick the ones that you want and then decide what you're going to do about it, assuming that you're not going to be able to do everything. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything, right? It means that you should try to do what you can do, and decide that very strategically. We're going to work on this issue, and this is how we're going to work on it. And then you might actually make some headway that way.
Beautiful. Sarah Brooks. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the
I want
winner.
to go back to the texts. I'm not very comforted by hanging all of this on the Exodus verses, because to me, if the damage was really to the woman, she would receive the payment. But since it goes to the husband who owned the children, it's not strong enough for me. And I will also point out that, I'm doing Daf Yomi, and so it wasn't so long ago that a woman whose husband died, but she's pregnant, doesn't matter how pregnant she is exempt from levirate marriage because she's pregnant. So it's obviously not just water or not a fully formed human being. So there's a lot of tension in the text itself. And I also think that this, I am pro-choice, I'll say that reluctantly, but I am. I have 3 children who all went to very liberal progressive day schools, and they're all pro-life. So I'm deep in this every single day. They're all adults, being careful, thank God. I have that to at least rely on. But this National Council on Jewish Women, they seem to support abortion on demand, which I don't really know what that means in conjunction with not using it as birth control. I don't know what all those words really mean. Thank you.
No, fair enough. I mean, first of all, let me just start where you started with the Exodus passage. Sure. The Bible was written in a patriarchal society. The Mishnah and the Talmud were written in a patriarchal society. And the presumption was that that a man had the obligation to support his wife and children. So therefore, any money owing to the woman or to the children, for that matter, was ultimately deposited with him, and he had the obligation to use it in order to support the entire family, right? Not true for money that she took into the marriage. That's a whole other thing. Then she had the opportunity to make this either nichsei tzon barzel or nichsei malo, either property of iron sheep or property of plucking. That is, she could invest it with her husband and let her husband run manage the money. And then if he earned money, then she earned money. If he lost money, then she lost money. Or she could say it was iron sheep. This $1 million I'm bringing into the marriage. I'm bringing it into the marriage, and I expect that $1 million will then pass on to me and my children once you die, right? And so it's a CD as opposed to a stock investment or something like that, right? So I mean, in the ancient world, it was a patriarchal society, and that's how they dealt with this kind of stuff. Still, I mean, I think the Exodus 21 thing is actually controlling in the Mishnah and in later Jewish law in regard to in terms of how the fetus is understood. And as a matter of fact, well, I'll tell you a story. I was asked, a friend of mine is Richard Mao. He has a doctorate in philosophy. He is one of the most well-read people I've ever met. He, for many years, was the president of Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, which is the 3rd largest Protestant seminary in America. The 2 largest ones are Baptist ones in Dallas. So at one point, we got to know each other, and so at one point he asked me to come and talk to evangelical leaders about embryonic stem cell research. So this was going to be the first weekend in May. So I said to him, Richard, I observe Shabbat. So this is going to start on Saturday morning. So I'm going to have to come up to Pasadena on Friday afternoon, and so you're gonna have to pay for a hotel for me on Friday as well as Saturday. He said, that's fine, Elliot. Of course, you could become a Christian, right? You know, I mean, that's the kind of relationship we had. All right. Anyway, all right. So I got up early in daven, and then Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, they start with somebody, a biology professor from UC Berkeley, who explains what what embryonic stem cells are. Okay, fine. So then my turn. I say, so what's your problem with that? So they all bring out their Bibles. I have to admit I did not have a Bible with me. And they point to Jeremiah chapter 1. Mina beten yidaticha. I, God, knew you from the womb. I had a course in Jeremiah, so I knew that passage. Psalm 139, which I tell you I'd never read before. I, God, knitted you in the womb. Doesn't that mean that the embryo is a full-fledged human being in the womb? So I said to them, all right, if that's how you're looking at the Bible, turn to Psalm 19. Hashemayim, the heavens declare the glory of God. The heavens bespeak your wonderment. Do the heavens talk? I said to them. Nehemiah chapter 9. The sun and the moon bow down to you. Do the sun and the moon bow? So, and by the way, these people were really smart. They're heads of biotech companies, and some of their theologians at Fuller. I mean, these are not smart. They're not stupid people at all, by a long shot. So I said, do the sun and the moon bow? So one of them says, oh, we're supposed to see this as a metaphor. And I said, yeah. However much you understand the authority of the text at least uses good literary techniques. So these are simply metaphors for God being involved in human creation. And then I showed them Exodus chapter 21, right? And and I showed them what that means in terms of the status of the fetus. So they then went and caucused. And Sunday morning, they came back and said, well, we determined that there's nothing in the New Testament that is on point in regard to the status of the fetus. So then we are able to use the Old Testament to shape our policy. Exodus 21, we think, is controlling. Therefore, we may do embryonic stem cell research. I must say, not bad for a weekend's work on my part. Okay, right. But the point that I'm after is that these evangelical Christian leaders were very happy to use Exodus 21 as the controlling thing, the controlling way of looking at it. Because after all, when we're all said and done, the issue is not a biological question. Everybody agrees about the biology of human development. It's really metaphysical. It's above the level of, it's one level of abstraction above the physical, in which the question is, how do you perceive this morally and legally? How do you perceive human development morally and legally? And the Catholics have their way, and we have our way, and Roe v. Wade was yet another way. Right? By the way, there are other ways. Another secular ethicist that usually is quoted in a lot of bioethics books is Marianne Morin, who claims that even once a child is born, it should not have the full-fledged rights of a human being until it can become part of the moral community. What does it mean to be part of the moral community? It means that you know that there are choices and you can make those choices, which means that you would not have a full-fledged human being until whatever, age 4 or 5, right? So I'm trying, I don't think she's right about that, but my point is that it really is a metaphysical question, not a physical question.
Well, I think that just points out to the fact that we really don't know when a person becomes a person.
Well, I mean, depends what you mean, Sarah, right? We certainly know when sperm meets egg. We know a lot, actually, about how the fetus develops over time, right? We're learning more and more about the mental pieces of that development, right? The question is not that. The question is what do you legally and morally, what do you define as a person in development, and what do you find as a person? By the way, we have the same sort of issue later on in life. Who is a child and for what purposes, and who is an adult for what purposes? In America, you're an adult at age 12 for movies and things like that. At 16, in most states, you're able to get a driver's license. At 17 in some. At 18, you can be drafted if you're a guy. And you can vote, but that required a constitutional amendment for that. It's not until 21 that you're an adult for liquor, right? And if you're a man, it's not until 25 that you get adult rates for your car insurance.
Well, and
Right.
your frontal lobe hasn't completely developed
Well, fine. So
at best,
what
at
I'm
best.
trying to show you is that definition is the issue of definition is a really, from a philosophical point of view and also from a legal point of view, is a really sticky wicket, as the
I
Brits
agree.
like to say.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
What,
Right.
I have a question. What about the Jewish law? I don't remember, I don't know if it's called the law, and I don't remember how many days. But for example, an aunt of mine gave birth and the baby died within, I think, 2 weeks after birth.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we go to the cemetery, all of those babies are buried in a separate section. They don't have headstones or, you know, anything that gives a date on it or anything, because they weren't considered that they lived long enough.
That's right.
And I
It's
don't remember
30
the
days.
number of days. Oh,
That's
40?
right. It's 30 days before
30.
a child is called a bar kayama, right? That is somebody who's really alive, right? So if a child is born, but dies within 30 days of birth, right? Then there usually is a burial, but not full shiva. And if you're interested in this, by the way, there are the first woman to be ordained as a conservative rabbi was Amy Alberg in 1985, and then there were a number of others, and I was already on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, and at that time, and in the late 80s, we had two different women rabbis, Deborah Reed Blank and Amy Alberg, I think, who disagreed on the status of a child born but dies within the first 30 days. What should happen? And I remember saying to the law committee at the time, it now has become clear that women rabbis can disagree with each other just as much as men rabbis can, right? But if you want to see that, you can simply go on the website of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. The Standards, Rabbi Teller can help you with that if you want. And you can see those two different vote about what should be the response of the community if a child dies within the first 30 days after birth, I mean. One arguing that we should have now that we know about fetal development, and we have sonograms and all of that, that the parents really do expect that the child will, if born, will live. So therefore we should do full Shiva rites for a child that is born, even if it dies within the first 30 days. Whereas the other one says, no, that will complicate our stance on abortion. And so we should certainly we should do Bikur Cholim, that is visiting the parents who the mother might be literally physically still recovering, but both the mother and the father psychologically recovering from the death of their child. And so we should treat it that way. But the point is, that's where that comes from, because you have to remember that until very recently in human history, a large percentage of children were miscarried, and another large percentage of children died in childbirth. I only found out very after the fact. I had a grandfather who had, I had a great grandfather who had 3 wives, because the first 2 died in childbirth.
Yeah, that was very common even 100 years ago, and even 50 years ago or so, about 1/3 of all pregnancies ended in miscarriage. The data now is 25%. So 1 in 4 pregnancies. I mean, these are, I like to ask people who are against abortion, well, you know, if you think that God has a hand in this, why do 1 out of 4 women who get pregnant have a miscarriage?
There you go. And that's when they already know that they're pregnant, right? If you're talking about the first month of pregnancy, when most miscarriages happen, it's much greater. It's a much higher percentage.
Oh yeah. And I've known women as late as their 7th month to have a miscarriage, which is possibly a viable time, but if God, quote unquote, if you believe that, is letting this happen, can I go back to the 30 days? How
Sure.
long ago was that decided or something?
But that comes in, if I remember correctly, I don't think it's in the Mishnah. I have to check that out. I think it's only in the Talmud already, right? But I should say the Mishnah was added at around 200 or so of the Common Era, the Talmud around 500 of the Common Era, right? And so I don't remember exactly whether that 30-day rule came up already in the Mishnah or wasn't until later, but at least 1500 years ago.
Thank you. So Rabbi Dorff, we're nearing the end of our time. I wish we had more time for more questions, and perhaps we will.
I have a question. So I think probably most of us on this call probably agree philosophically on this issue. So what actions can we take to make positive change, not just for the time that we're living in, but for many of us, as I'm looking at our photos and names, for our children and our grandchildren?
Right. I think that's an internal conversation that you as a congregation should have. Right. I mean, it's as I said to you earlier, I think you have to decide what issue you want to address, whether it's abortion or climate change or education or healthcare or immigration, and a whole series of them that are really important. Right. I think you have to decide which ones of them you want to address and how, and try to figure out the most effective way to do that in your community.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the beginning of a larger conversation that will continue internally. Yeah, Rona, last question. Unmute.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, try one more time. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so I am very strongly for abortion rights, partly from an experience in personal family with a teenage pregnancy before abortion was legal, not my own, but in extended family. That was very traumatic in the end. And it was right before New York legalized abortion, and the person went to New York, and it was not handled well, but it had to be done. This was a teenager. There was no question. Otherwise, I guess she could have had the baby and be put up for adoption, but our family was dysfunctional already. Okay, it was like after my mother had died, I was like told to keep the family together. Don't ask at age 18, keep the family together. That's not. Mm-hmm. So I really believe, for me personally, it is a Jewish value. No matter what the law says, that choice needs to be there, whether you call it mental health and extend mental health to that 14 or 15-year-old, whether you do whatever you have to do, there's just, and that it should be a personal decision or a family decision, not made by a government for me.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's just my stand. I'm also a member of NCJW. I put in the chat that they have signs you can get for like a $20 donation that talks about religion, my religion, and abortion rights. If anybody's brave enough, I'm a little nervous about doing it, honestly, because of where we live in Texas. But
thank you. Thank you. Rabbi Dorff, you want to give us a conclusion?
All right, and that's all I had to say. I mean,
Thank
just
you,
personal experience. This is just.
Thank you, Rona.
I would only say that this is a very important issue among a number of the others that we've been talking about. And I think that, as I said in the very beginning, I think that the recent Supreme Court decision was bad for America on all kinds of grounds. And I think that American law should not be governed by Jewish law or by Catholic positions or by any other religious position. And that I think Jefferson was right after it's all said and done, that where there are really large discrepancies in moral views among Americans, then the state should stay out of it.
Gotcha. Thank you. This is the beginning of a conversation for us, and we may come back and ask more questions if you'll take us back.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.
Absolutely. Okay.
The beginning of the process. Thanks.
Right on. Okay. Bye-bye.